Song one more time for these two songs. $861, but first we'll sing 900. 861. I'm sorry. Okay, the other one, 900, I guess first. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful Jesus is to me. Counselor, Prince of Peace, mighty God is He, saving me, keeping me from my sin and shame. Wonderful is my Redeemer, praise His name. His name is wonderful. His name is wonderful. His name is wonderful, Jesus my Lord. He is the mighty King, Master of everything. His name is wonderful, Jesus my Lord. He's the great shepherd, the rock of all ages. Almighty God is He. Bow down before Him, love and adore Him. His name is wonderful, Jesus my Lord.
There was a really good luncheon today, and some people must have eaten too much. They didn't make it back tonight. Either that or maybe they got enough worshiping this morning, huh? But we're glad you're here. Those of you who are visiting, we're just delighted that you've come. And tonight I just want to talk a little bit about a miracle of Jesus that has really meant a lot to me for a long, long time. It wasn't the first sermon I preached, but it was one of the first sermons I preached about Jesus feeding the 5,000. Now, it's not the same sermon, but that's what I talked about in one of my sermons early in my preaching life, because it wasn't the first miracle either, but it's the only one that's recorded in all four Gospels. And if it's recorded in all four Gospels, I think it must be pretty important. And by the way, Patty's set up right here. She was expecting this couple to be back tonight. Apparently they got detained. They had something else going on this afternoon, but I don't know if you all saw or not. They've been here one time before, Sunday morning, Sunday night before, and I stepped into the sound room back there and was able to see them standing back here singing. And she is deaf and blind, and he has a pretty significant hearing loss. And he was signing in her hand. That's called tactile signing. And she was reading his hands. And that's how she hears, and she sees, of course, through his eyes. And it's a rather amazing thing to watch. Of course, I was standing up here, and I could see, and Patty was doing a really good job helping to speaking to them in a way that they could follow. And so, anyway, that's a diversion, but now I'm back. So, I wouldn't want to leave you guys hanging too long, okay? So I came back. But that miracle, recording for us in John chapter 6, is one of my favorite miracles. And it's not the only time Jesus fed a lot of people. He fed 4,000 another time, but 4,000 men, not counting the women and children. So if you do your math, that's about 15 to 20,000 people. If they had wives and they were traveling along with them. So could have been as many as 15 to 20,000 people. And I want us to read together here just a moment about this event. It's about a year before the crucifixion, and after this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a multitude followed him because they saw the signs which he did on those who were diseased. They went up on the mountain. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a multitude was coming to him, Jesus said to Philip, "How are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" This he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered, he said, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get even a little bit. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are these among so many?" And Jesus said, make the men sit down. In number, about 5,000. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they would. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the fragments left over, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves, that were left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign which he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Now, if you keep reading here, Jesus will go back across the sea. He was trying to get away from the crowd, but the crowd followed him. And he has just learned about the death of John the Baptist. Herod putting him to death, beheading him. And so the crowd followed him over there. And so he sat down and he taught them, and he gave them this very, very powerful demonstration of the power of God. Now, they were following him because they had seen the signs, the miracles that he had done. When they get back to the other side, Jesus then talks to them about a different kind of bread. And he says, "I'm the bread of life." And they're a bit confused because they couldn't quite understand what that meant. And he's telling them, "I can give you bread to eat, and you'll never be hungry again." And they said, well, notice what they said. "Give us a sign so we can believe." Now, that is so amazing to me because he had just given them a sign. Feeding 5,000 people with 2 loaves, barley loaves, and 2 fish, or 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Wow. Now, how easy it is for us to forget. And when I see that, when I understand what was happening there, it reminds me of how easy it is for us to forget. Because the same Jesus who did this miracle and did all these other miracles, who raised Lazarus from the dead, and he himself was raised from the dead, this same Jesus is the Jesus we're worshiping tonight. He's the one we have come to praise and to serve. And it would just seem that the whole world would bow down before him. The problem is we're so used to these stories and hearing things about Jesus and having such a distorted view of him that it's very, very difficult for us to see this as something that's real. It was a long time ago. It's kind of like Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb. Well, we know that happened, but we just enjoy the benefits of it. And we don't go back and think, wow, he spent a long time and tried 200 times before he got it to work. Now, Jesus never had to try anything twice to get it to work. Whatever he did it, and it was powerfully done. So, when I look at this, I remember distinctly back when I talked about this at a much younger age, I said, let's take a lesson from the disciples. Let's take a lesson from Jesus. Let's take a lesson from the loaves and fish and from the crowd and all that. Well, there are lots of lessons in here. And you can go through this and just find lots of powerful things. One is the concern of the disciples for the people. They're hungry. It's been a long day, and so now, was it solely for them, or were they beginning to think, I'm getting hungry myself? But anyway, they were concerned, so they said, Lord, these people are hungry. When you put all the passages together, the records together, you find that there were several pieces to this. Not one, they don't all give every detail, but pretty much so. And so you've got the disciples here. You've got Andrew. There's a lesson from Andrew. He found this boy. Out of this huge crowd, he finds this boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he comes, tells Jesus. Well, if you look back, when you're first introduced to Andrew, what's he doing? He's bringing somebody to Jesus. He brought Nathanael to Jesus. And here he brings a little boy to him. And Philip, by the way, Jesus asked him, what are we going to do? Where are we going to find some food to eat? Well, Philip was from Bethsaida, and that's where they were. They were on that side of the Sea of Galilee. And so, obviously, if anybody knew where the grocery store was, it would have been him. So he says, where are we going to find something to eat? And Philip says, well, Lord, he said, if we had 200 denarii, that would be 200 days of pay for the average worker. If we had all that much money, we couldn't buy enough food to feed these folks. Well, Jesus could have produced it anywhere, but Andrew finds this little boy and brings the little boy to Jesus. Said, he's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. So Jesus says, make the people sit down. Well, they sit down. What's he going to do? What's he going to do with 5 loaves and 2 fish? You remember in the Old Testament in I think it's 1 Kings or 2 Kings 4, when the widow didn't have enough oil, and Elisha multiplied the oil, and she had more and more and more, and she couldn't run out. Well, this is kind of what was happening here. Now, these were real events. Guys, this happened. That really happened with Elisha, and this is really happening. So Jesus looks at this, and one of the very first things he sees is, well, there's plenty. There's plenty. There's plenty? Well, that shows us how we see things so differently. And one of the most interesting parts of that is, if you really look at it, you've got the ability that the little boy had and the ability that the other folks had. There's nothing. There's nothing. But you're looking at the ability that God has. So what it tells us is that God doesn't need as much as we think we need. It tells us that God wants what we do have and not what we don't have. We always think, okay, boy, if I had more, I could do more for God. You have enough. You have plenty. You have plenty of talents. You have plenty of ability. And He can take that and use it and multiply it over and over and over again. And so, there was a fellow out in Texas years ago, back during the Depression, the Great Depression. It's been nearly 100 years since that thing, 90 years since that big Great Depression and started. And you guys have probably read about it and heard about it. I heard about it all the time growing up, with my dad. My dad and mom had lived through that. And so we heard about working the WPA and all of that. My dad used to build roads working for the WPA. That was a government job, a way of providing money to the poor folks who didn't have anything. So I heard a lot about that Depression. Well, this fellow, don't know his first name, and that last name was Yates. And he lived on a sheep ranch out in West Texas, and he was about to lose his ranch. He couldn't make payments, and family was just about to starve as well. And lo and behold, these folks came over to his place, and they were from this big company, and they said, "We would like to drill on your land. We'd like to drill on your land. And we think there's oil here." Well, he had the mineral rights, and so they drilled down about 1,100 feet, and they struck a huge reserve of oil, and it just came gushing out. And the first well was producing about 50,000 gallons a day, and then they drilled others, and they were producing 125,000 gallons a day. So here's a guy who's sitting on this huge oil field and not knowing it. And that's kind of the way it is with us. We don't know what our ability is until God drills down, and we have to let Him do that. And yet we tend to evaluate everything so much in human terms. But then you notice with this little boy, he could have said, "No, this is my lunch. This is my lunch. I'm not going to share this." No, he made it available. So it doesn't matter what ability we have. If we don't make it available to God, then nothing happens. And yet when we make it available to Him, God takes the little bit and makes much. He makes a lot. I read that it's estimated that there are $50 billion of unclaimed inheritance money out there in America. $50 billion that have not been claimed yet. Now, I haven't even looked to see if any of it's mine, because I'm confident it's not, right? That's what happens. Most everybody don't look, because we know it's not ours. We never had that rich uncle. So, but we're sitting on this huge ability, but in our eyes, we don't see it. But in God's eyes, He does. What we have to do is make it available to Him. And in Ezekiel chapter 22, you may remember, as Israel was so defiant, Judah was so defiant from God, and Ezekiel was one of the prophets was carried into captivity when Nebuchadnezzar came and took Judah into captivity. And along with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those guys were carried, and Daniel, they were carried into captivity. Well, God said, "I looked for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land so that I would not have to destroy it. I looked for a man who would stand in the gap, who would build the wall, who would stand in the gap. And he said, I found none. I found none. Wow. Why did he find none? Because nobody made themselves available to do that. Throughout the Old Testament, we all know that God's people sometimes face some formidable enemies and foes out there who were very powerful, and God's people have always done that. Few in number compared to all the vast armies that Satan commands. And sometimes we just see ourselves as grasshoppers instead of giants. Well, with God, we're giants. Paul said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So here's a little boy. He made his lunch available to God. And Jesus took it, multiplied it, just like he will do with what we have. God doesn't need much. He needs a willing heart. He needs to make ourselves available. And then the third and final thing that I want to talk about is the abundance. Whatever God touches is multiplied many, many times. We have that promise in Scripture. Give and it shall be given to you, pressed down, shaken together. Yeah. You remember, some of you grew up on a farm, and if you did, and you raised beans and sow beans, you know what it is to make a bushel. Now, some of you don't know what a bushel is. A bushel basket is about, probably hold, if you were putting water in it, probably hold about 5 gallons or less. And so this bushel, we would pick beans because we always had lots of beans growing in our big garden out there. We had lots of kids, and we would sometimes sell beans or give them away. It was very interesting, though. Sometimes we would try to give beans away, or corn away, and the people would say, well, they're already picked, which means that if they're not already picked, we don't want them. No, you have to come and pick them. Well, no, I'll just pass on that. So we would sometimes sell them by the bushel. And we kids were out there, and we would throw those things in. If you've ever taken a bunch of beans and just thrown them in, then you know that they're going to be all twisted up and all that. And we'd say, Mom, it's full. And Mom would come over and she says, that's not full. Well, Mom, it's running over. She'd take that basket and she would shake it, and it would just settle down. And we still had another half that we had to pick. I thought, Mom, why did you have to do that? She says, no, you have to do that. You're not selling people a bushel if you don't do that. Well, when I read this passage, about how he's going to give far more than we could imagine, and it's like he fills this basket and he shakes it up, presses it down. That's what God does for us. He always does far more than we could ever imagine. If we make ourselves available, whatever resources we have, whoever we are, then he can take us and multiply those. So when Jesus performed this miracle, there are 12 baskets full left over. I remember in that sermon I preached years ago that I was talking about the fact that God didn't waste anything. He doesn't. He doesn't waste anything, doesn't let anything go to waste. And now, maybe your moms they may have been just like my mom. My mom used to tell us to eat that biscuit. Think of all those poor, starving people in China. Now, I never figured out as a kid how my eating that extra biscuit was going to feed anybody in China. But somehow, I guess I thought, well, Mom said to do that. And she was saying, you have blessings, use them, and don't waste them. Don't throw things away. And so my dad was that way. Maybe yours were. They were that way too. I still have shoes, lots of shoes that they're in this little cabinet thing downstairs that I keep thinking, well, maybe someday I'll wear them again. No, I'm not going to wear them again. And my dad would resole the shoes. I still have one of those shoelaces, by the way. I've not put a sole on a shoe ever since I've been married. And that was been a few years ago. But you don't waste. God doesn't waste. Well, not only that, God provides an abundance. And so when we take whatever little bit we have, we give it to God. Now, I don't think that promise means that if I can't sing on tune, if I give my voice to God, that He's going to suddenly tune me up and I'm going to be this fabulous singer. No, but God will take those praises and they will be magnified. That's the story of the widow and giving the mite, the widow's mite. And Jesus says she's given more than all these other people. I never forget the story, a true story, out in Texas. This church was raising money to do some building work. And they had lots of wealthy people in that church. And preacher's name was Jowett. And so they had this big fund drive, and he was standing up before the folks, and he was reading the pledges. He was reading the amount. And when he would read how much this person was giving or has given, hundreds of thousands of dollars, the crowd would just cheer and they would applaud. And then there was a little widow in that church. She pledged just $2 or $3. Nobody applauded. Total silence. And Jowett put his hand to his ear and he said, I hear the applause of the crucified hands. Isn't that great? A little bit. I never forget the little lady who used to send $2 to a program that I was, a ministry that I was working with, a statewide agency serving children and youth. And she would send $2 with a note that says, I made this taking in some extra laundry. Another lady was deaf. She used to send $10. Now, let me tell you something. I tried to make those dollars stretch, really stretch as far as they would. And God blessed it. He blessed it. And that agency grew and grew. And today it's merged with Tennessee Children's Home. And it's part of that. And there are now homes in Brazil and in several states and across the state of Tennessee. And it went from having almost no money to owning 2 residential facilities, an office building, and $500,000 in reserve for development. And God blesses the little bit that we offer to Him when we give it to Him. So whatever it is, He will take it and magnify it. And I think it's a terrible mistake when we look at small things, even small numbers, or we look at small resources and we limit the power of God Say, well, we can't really do that. The first question we need to answer, the primary question we need to answer is, does God want it done? Does He want us to do it? And if He does, we do it. We do it. I know you could probably think of a whole lot more things to say about that, but I don't know about you, but I'm kind of tired of hearing me talk. So I'm going to respectfully stop, and this will make David Garrett so happy. You didn't bring your stop sign, did you? No. Those of you who are visiting, David showed up one night with a stop sign. Yeah. I think God has a sense of humor, David. The Bible says that God laughed 4 times in the Bible. Do you know that? He laughed 4 times. Well, I want you to go find those. I will tell you this, that whenever God laughs, it's a sad day for man. It's a sad day for man. Okay. We're going to sing the song that Mark has selected here. If you need to come and respond to the gospel or make some corrections in your life that we can help you with, or you need us, our prayers, then we're going to invite you to come as we stand and sing.
The worthy praise of the wonderful love of Jesus. Wonderful love, wonderful love, wonderful love of Jesus. Wonderful love, wonderful love, wonderful love of Jesus. My hope for pardon when I call, my trust for lifting when I fall. In life, in death, my all in all is the wonderful love of Jesus. Wonderful love, wonderful love, wonderful love of Jesus. Wonderful love, wonderful love, wonderful love of Jesus. Please be seated.